Okay, morning. So this is the poem by Carol Ann Duffy, Before You Were Mine. If I'm honest, personally, it's not my favourite, but it is, I think it's because it's got quite a monotone, kind of reflective aspect to it, which for me doesn't really, it doesn't engage as much as some other poems do. I don't think that it necessarily has too much of kind of energy to it, but I think that's basically the intention of the poet, because she wants to show that she feels that in some ways she's talking about her mother and how jealous as she was of her previous life and how she wasn't a part of her mother's life. So we can go ahead and just put the tone. We will establish the tone after we have looked through the poem. So a little background about Carol Ann Duffy. So some things which probably aren't relevant to the annotations of the poem, but she was Scottish. She was raised as a Roman Catholic, this meaning that she was, the religion is very, very strict in her family, Roman Catholic. It's a little bit stricter than Christianity. She is writing about her mother, who I imagine that it's when it was in the very early 1900s. She wrote the poem in 1955, so we can I put a little annotation here. In 1950s, women roles were very, very set. So to act, ladylike and committed to the husband. Of course, it's not as the roles of a woman wasn't as stuck and fixed as they were previous to the 1900s. They were a little bit more relaxed because we had the growth of the suffragettes and everything, and feminism slowly started to take its toll. So it's not as extreme as, let's say, for instance, Sonnet 29 or When We Two Parted. The female here, obviously, she has her restrictions as being the conventional lady, but she doesn't necessarily live in a heavy patriarchal society. So in that way, if you were comparing this poem, I personally think it's quite similar to Porphyria's Lover, because you've got the possessiveness and kind of need of or jealousy of them having this other life, and in some way them wanting to kind of take over their life in some way. Now, another reason why it's a good comparison is because you could say there's the roles of the women, they're very fixed. However, this is a modern poem, so it kind of shows how females started to break out a little bit and were able to kind of be a little bit more gregarious, a bit more social, and kind of mix with the public, which they weren't back in Robert Browning's poem in Victorian era. Okay, so the title already shows a sign of possession. So if we are comparing or making links to Porphyria's Lover, you had the possessive pronoun. Here we have the possessive word mine. So there's before you were mine. So this is the narrator here. The poet is a child, and they're speaking about, they've basically found a photograph of their mother when they were younger. And the child is kind of feeling quite, I think, quite jealous in some ways, but then also quite guilty. The guilty feeling is coming through because she believes that her mother, before having her, was a lot more adventurous, seemed to have a lot more fun than she is now. We can all connect to this and understand that, when you get older, you realise actually your parents had a whole other life and they're not necessarily as innocent as they let themselves out to be. They do technically have a responsibility to seem like a very mature and ideal kind of human, so that you can then follow suit. However, you do discover as you get older, usually, I know I did, that your parents aren't necessarily as angelic as you once thought they were. Okay, so quite an easy poem to analyse, so I'll go through this very quickly with you. So I'm 10 years away from the corner you laughed on with your pals Maggie McGeaney and Jean Duff. The three of you bend from the waist, holding each other on your knees, and shriek at the pavement. Your polka dot dress blows round your legs. Marilyn. So I'm 10 years away from the corner you laughed on with your pals. This is informal, or otherwise known as colloquial language. You could say that she's like, oh, you're there with your pals in this photograph. So you could say there's an element of like sarcasm or like bitterness. She's like, oh, weren't you having fun back then? So sarcasm, bitterness through this use of colloquial language. However, you could also, a second interpretation, you could connect it to the fact that Mother was this informal character. She was quite, she was a relaxed person. Relaxed, kind of playful person. Okay, so I'm just moving this outside. So, if we look at where she mentions her friends as well, this is Maggie McGeaney and Jean Duff. So she's obviously in this photo, she's hanging out with her friends, she's having a good laugh. The three of you bend from the waist, holding each other on your knees and shriek. So they're obviously having a very good time. Shriek is the use of sensory imagery. Because it's sound, if you want to be more specific for the higher marks, it would be called auditory imagery. The idea of shriek, that sound, that specific verb, it kind of shows a loss of control or absence of control to kind of depict the way that her mother was kind of this, you know, adventurous, spontaneous female. So you could think about that. Your polka dot dress blows around your legs. Now she uses the icon Marilyn, so Marilyn Monroe. Now Marilyn Monroe, her career and her fame and her glory was obviously ended at the time where she sadly chose to take her own life. Now this metaphor here, it could, don't know how to annotate this, but this could be a metaphor to represent how her mother essentially took her own life. I know it's a bit dramatic, but she's taken her own life by having a child, and she's chosen to kind of end her glory and fame for the sake of, you know, as the child sees it, her depressing future. So a metaphor for how her mother's fame ended. It also could be a metaphor or symbolise the way that the mother is very glamorous, the way that she maybe is a little bit promiscuous, which means quite sexually active, someone who enjoys fame, enjoys people to look at her. So Marilyn Monroe was essentially a sexual icon back in her day. At the times it was seen as quite you know, it was still quite strict gender roles, so you would still expect to act like a lady, as I said, but Marilyn Monroe really broke those conventions to suggest that she believes that her mother was, she idolises her mother, and she believes that she was someone unique. Second verse. So I'm not there yet. So the use of caesura here, caesura, C-A-E-S-U-R-A. The use of caesura here suggests that this phrase bothers her. The fact that she's not there, she's not reached the fame and glory which her mother seemed to have achieved. So this suggests that she wants to be there, a sense of longingness, connecting to Porphyria's lover, of him wanting her to be there forever. So you could connect that as well, make a little annotation or connection to Porphyria's. The thought of me doesn't occur in the ballroom with 1,000 eyes, the fizzy, movies tomorrow, the right walk home could bring. I knew you would dance like that before you were mine. Your ma stands at the close with the hiding for the late one. You reckon it's worth it. Okay, so we have once again the colloquial language of fizzy to suggest that the mother's life was, you know, a little bit playful. Having fizzy is champagne, another word for champagne, or maybe Prosecco. The thought of me doesn't occur in the ballroom with 1,000 eyes. So this suggests that the mother was very popular. There's loads of people who would look at her. She's clearly someone to look at. Movies tomorrow, the right walk home could bring. I knew you would dance like that. All these uses of caesura and full stop suggest that she's got quite a serious tone, in my opinion, or bitter, as I mentioned before. The jealous kind of tone that I wrote up here. It suggests that she keeps breaking every time that she makes a point. She's like, oh, okay, so you're doing that then. All right, so you had fun. For me, it's because not necessarily you want to write about the fact that this narrator, this child, is being selfish. I would say that it's more just because they've suddenly had this kind of found guilt that the mother, they may be the reason that the mother had to put this behind them. The decade ahead of my loud possessive yell was the best one, eh? I remember my hands in those high heel red shoes, relics, and now your ghost clatters towards me over George Square till I see you clear as scent under the tree, with its lights and whose small bites on your neck, sweetheart. Alright, so the decade ahead of my loud possessive yell was the best one, eh? So this is the time where her life has ended here, the mother's life has ended because she had the child, and here the child enters her life, and this is the way that the poet believes that her mother's life had changed. So this means 10 years. So the 10 years ahead of my loud possessive yell was the best one. So the mother must have told this child that she was the best thing that happened to her, but she is obviously in disbelief of this because it looks like previously the mother has had a pretty good time. So there's the use of rhetorical question here. Question. Maybe to suggest frustration or need for an answer. You could connect it to Porphyria's lover and the way that they are seeming quite annoyed or unsatisfied by the love and affection the other person has given them, the same way Porphyria's lover was, the narrator was very unsatisfied with the woman's affection. I remember my hands in the high heel red shoes, relics. So these high heel red shoes are clearly something which mother owned previously in her previous life. Now you can imagine the child, which I've seen some kids do before, where they'll enter their mum's, dress cupboard, kind of presume that it's all theirs, and then slip maybe a dress on or a scarf on, maybe try their mother's makeup. I'm sure some girls might be able to connect to that. But here it's explained that the daughter remembers a time, or the son remembers a time where they put their hands inside her mother's red shoes. This could almost be symbolic for the fact that the child has taken over. A child has, oh God, I haven't got much space, taken over mum's, not only possessions, but mum's life. She's like kind of molded herself. She's with no kind of ask, no permission. She feels that she's taken over her mum's life. Relics are things which have survived through history. So it shows that that they're in some ways, in my interpretation, it could insinuate that the child feels that she's overwrote kind of or overwritten the history of her mother. So overwritten history of mother. Okay, and now your ghost clatters towards me over George Square. Of course, her mother's not dead. However, the ghost could suggest that a part of her did die in her previous life when she had this child. It could suggest that this memory and the fact that this child now knows that her mother had this fun and exciting life. This ghost kind of connects or symbolises the guilt in which they have for stopping the mother from enjoying her life fully. So the ghost clatters. Once again, it symbolises how in her previous life she was, the mother was quite noisy, loud, spontaneous, maybe a bit clumsy, towards me over George Square till I see you, clear as scent. This is interesting. So this is a technique which might be new to you. Now, the sentence clear as scent, it suggests that they'd be able to see the scent, because you're saying it's as clear as scent. You're saying it's visually as clear as a smell. Obviously, that doesn't make much sense because we wouldn't be able to see smell. This technique, by mixing up these senses, it's called synesthesia. I've got it here, but I'll write it out even bigger here for you so you can get it. SYNAESTHESIA. Synesthesia is the blending of senses. For here, like the same way with the idea of the high heel red shoes and the way that the child kind of slipped her hands into the shoes and kind of overtook her mother in some ways, or overtook her life, I think that it kind of links to that for me anyway, unless you can come up with a different interpretation, please let me know. So it shows that they've kind of blended together, and there's the possessiveness of the child now taking control of her mother's life. With its lights and whose small bites on your neck, sweetheart. So obviously these are love bites. The mother must have been quite promiscuous. Once again, another rhetorical question. It's quite interesting, these questions, because there's a slight role reversal in the way that kind of the child is looking at her this photo of her mother when she was younger, and questioning her in quite a judgmental way, just like, oh, well, where were you last night? Kind of like typical questions which mothers might ask if they were to interrogate a child with the suspicion that they've been up to no good. So there's a role reversal here. You could make a comment on that. Then we go to the auditory imagery, so the sound imagery. Cha-cha-cha, you teach me the steps on the way home from the mass is the church. So this is them, you can actually just annotate how the first two verses are the past. And this one is, well, it's the future. No, it's not, it's the present. So it's kind of like back, this is before and this is after. Before she was hers, and then after. So cha-cha-cha, you teach me the steps on the way home from mass. So obviously they dance home from after they go on their Sunday church. This maybe shows a sign that the child is understanding now, or making like suspicious links as to why she is like dancing with her home, because she was obviously this person who enjoyed the idea of dancing, which she's now newly discovered from her past life. It's quite also ironic that she's coming home from mass, the way that now she realizes that her mother didn't necessarily have such a holy, saintly life. So it could, like I said, it kind of shows the poet's realization that the mother's maybe not as innocent as she once made herself out to be. Stamping stars from the wrong pavement. If you know, in America, there's those stars that are on the pavement that suggest that, you know, when someone is famous, you get, like, if you're lucky, you get a big star on one of the slabs of pavement, which suggests that you've made it, I guess. So stamping stars from the wrong pavement. Stamping stars refers to what I've just mentioned. The fact that they're on the wrong pavement is interesting. It might be the fact that the narrator is suggesting this pathway which has led them from mass is not the correct pavement because the mother was not holy. So they feel like it's not the right path for you, mother, because clearly you've been up to no good in your past life. So it's a slight maybe feeling of betrayal. Once again, Porphyria's lover kind of it's kind of calling to me at the moment. It also could suggest that the child thinks that the mother would have been, or father would have been able to have a different direction. Mother would have been able to have a different direction if not for the child, a more positive direction maybe. Even then, I wanted the bald girl winking in Portobello, somewhere in Scotland before I was born. The glamorous love lasts, where you sparkle and waltz and laugh before you were mine. So there's all the use of kind of the movement, sparkling, waltz, laugh. Doing words, doing imagery is called kinesthetic imagery. All this different type of imagery used within this poem. So you have kinesthetic, you have auditory, I'm sure you have visual. It suggests the idea of a kind of the vibrant, active, colourful life the mother used to have before she was his. Before she was his or hers. So the form, similar to Porphyria's lover, is a dramatic monologue, some would argue, because she could be speaking to someone. She does say you and your, so it might be a dramatic monologue. However, it is not a fictional character, so I believe, I'm not sure if it's connected specific to Carol Ann Duffy's life, but it's not a fictional character. There's a cyclical structure in the way that if you look at my highlighted parts of the poem, there's pavement here, pavement there, to maybe suggest or metaphorically convey. So cyclical structure, which I haven't even spelled it right down there, S-Y, cyclical, S-Y-C-L-I-C-A-L. The cyclical structure could suggest the course of life, the fact that having a child and everything is inevitable. It could suggest that that the mother feels that she's now stuck in the past, living in the past because she's not enjoying her future. Maybe it's like the nature of existence in some ways, or being able to live in the future but also be able to reflect on the past as well. That's all up for your interpretations. It is up to you. Now the structure is tightly controlled, so actually contrary to Porphyria's Lover, if you want to make the connection, it is a lot more kind of organised, the verses here. So it's tightly controlled, there's 4 verses, 5 lines. It might mirror the way that the child is wanting to control in some ways the mother's current life and their current relationship, or their need to control it, and kind of jealousy in that way. It mirrors the inevitability of future life, control of society, mirrors the control of society and the way that you have to act a certain way, like the mothers are expected to be seen as this mature individual. Let me know if that has or has not helped, and I will be releasing new annotations of different poems soon. Thank you guys, bye.